In just 17 seconds, Jasmine Crockett delivered 7 devastating words that caused Eric Trump to crumble like a house of cards, exposing a $2.3 million charity scam that had been hidden in plain sight. Not a single donation reached the children. Not a soul was warned about the web of lies that stretched from cancer wards to campaign coffers. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice or pound the table. She detonated their entire empire with surgical precision while the world held its breath and cameras captured every micro-expression of guilt. What were those 7 words that made a billionaire's son look like a cornered animal with nowhere to run? The congressional hearing room smelled like lemon polish and fresh lies, the kind of artificial cleanliness that tries to scrub away the stench of corruption but only makes it more obvious. Chairs were lined up too straight, flags hung too stiff, like they'd been starched to salute power instead of justice. The mahogany walls gleamed under fluorescent lights, freshly scrubbed, as if someone had tried to wash the truth right out of the air itself. Nothing moved in that sterile chamber, but everything watched with the tension of a courtroom where the verdict had already been written in blood money. The silence was so thick you could taste the fear of what was about to be exposed. Then Jasmine Crockett walked in, and the entire atmosphere shifted like a storm front moving across a calm lake. She didn't glide or float like some politician playing to the cameras. She cut through the silence with purpose, her heels tapping against marble floors like a countdown timer that everyone could hear, but no one wanted to acknowledge. Her face didn't flicker with the fake smiles or nervous energy that infected everyone else in that room. No small talk, no political pleasantries, no half-hearted waves to the gallery. Just the kind of stare that made grown men instinctively check their ties and wonder what secrets she already knew about them. This wasn't just another oversight hearing where politicians throw softballs and hope for sound bites. This was a trap set on marble floors, and Jasmine Crockett came holding the matchbook that would burn down everything they thought they could hide. At the witness table sat Eric Trump, lounging like a man auditioning to play the role of untouchable billionaire son. His arms stretched casually behind his head, legs spread wide in a display of arrogance that screamed confidence, wearing the kind of smug grin that assumed the ending of this political theater had already been written in his favor. He whispered something to his attorney and let out a small chuckle, loud enough to be picked up by the microphones but quiet enough to seem dismissive. It was the laugh of a man who had never faced real consequences, who had spent his entire life watching his father bulldoze through scandals with nothing more than Twitter tantrums and campaign rallies. 2 rows behind him sat Donald Trump himself, stone-faced and silent as a monument to ego and fury. His arms were crossed like a wall built out of rage and entitlement, creating a barrier between himself and the uncomfortable questions that were about to rain down like artillery shells. He didn't blink, didn't fidget, didn't acknowledge the cameras that kept zooming in on his face looking for cracks in the facade. His presence alone was a warning shot fired across the bow of anyone who dared to challenge the Trump empire. The message was clear without him saying a word. I'm still the king of this circus, and circuses don't investigate the ringmaster. But Jasmine Crockett didn't bow to kings or cower before empires built on smoke and mirrors. She didn't flinch when Donald Trump's cold stare tried to freeze her blood, didn't hesitate when Eric's smirk tried to dismiss her as just another politician looking for her 15 minutes of fame. She sat down with the calm confidence of someone who had done her homework, adjusted the microphone with steady hands, and prepared to speak the kind of truth that lands like a slow-burning grenade with a very short fuse. The room fell silent as she opened her mouth, and even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was about to explode across every news channel in America. But before those 7 words would shatter Eric Trump's world forever, Jasmine would methodically dismantle their lies piece by piece, document by document, revealing a conspiracy so brazen and heartless that it would make hardened politicians weep and force an entire nation to confront the ugly truth about what happens when charity becomes just another word for theft. Mr. Chairman, Jasmine began, her voice calm and deliberate as a surgeon making the first incision, each word carefully measured to cut through the political theater and get straight to the bone. Let me be clear about what we're examining today. We are not judging a man. We are judging a mechanism. She paused, letting that word hang in the air like a blade suspended over the witness table, watching as Eric Trump's casual confidence flickered for just a moment. The silence stretched uncomfortably long, forcing everyone in the room to lean forward slightly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then she delivered the follow-up punch that would set the tone for everything that followed, a mechanism that wraps itself in children's faces while siphoning money into the back pockets of the powerful. That was the first time Eric Trump moved since taking his seat. Just a twitch of his mouth, barely perceptible to the naked eye, but the cameras caught it, and so did Jasmine. She had drawn first blood without even opening her briefcase, and everyone in that room knew they were watching something unprecedented unfold. This wasn't going to be another toothless congressional hearing where politicians asked prepared questions and accepted non-answers with polite nods. This was an execution, and Jasmine Crockett was holding the axe. She reached into her leather briefcase with the slow, deliberate movements of someone defusing a bomb, pulling out a thick yellow folder that seemed to glow under the harsh committee room lights. The folder was unmarked, unremarkable except for its obvious weight and the way Jasmine handled it like it contained radioactive material. She placed it on the desk with careful precision, quietly and slowly, like setting a landmine in the middle of a diplomatic dinner party. No label, no explanation, no dramatic flourish, just thick enough to make Eric Trump lean forward in his chair and Donald Trump tilt his head ever so slightly for the first time since the hearing began. It wasn't just paper inside that folder. It was evidence, timing, and revenge measured in black ink on white pages. The committee chairman cleared his throat and gave Jasmine the floor, unaware that he was essentially handing her a loaded weapon and permission to fire at will. Jasmine didn't waste the opportunity or the moment. She opened the folder with the same careful precision she had used to place it, her fingers moving like a card dealer who knew exactly which hand would win the game. For months, she said, tapping the folder once with her index finger, this evidence sat buried in bureaucratic filing cabinets and legal red tape. But today, it's time to see what happens when charity gets cross-examined under oath and under the lights. Eric Trump raised an eyebrow and smirked at his lawyer, mouthing something that looked suspiciously like, "Here we go," or maybe something less printable. But the cockiness didn't quite reach his eyes anymore, and the smirk looked more forced than natural, like a mask that was starting to slip. Jasmine didn't even glance in his direction. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the public gallery, toward the cameras, toward the millions of Americans who had trusted organizations like the Eric Trump Foundation with their hard-earned money and their desperate hopes for something better. When she spoke next, her voice dropped just slightly, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks open and unleashes its fury on everything below. If you've ever donated a single dollar to help a sick child, if you've ever written a check to a charity because you believed it would make a difference, if you've ever trusted that your money would go where they promised it would go, then this story is for you. The pause that followed wasn't dramatic theater. It was a moment of genuine connection between a congresswoman and the people she represented, between a truth teller and the people who deserved to hear the truth. Behind her, a C-SPAN cameraman was heard whispering, "Damn," under his breath as he realized he was capturing history in real time. Jasmine didn't smile or gloat or play to the cameras for effect. She simply sat back in her chair, her hand resting on that yellow folder like it was a fuse waiting for a flame, her eyes never leaving the witness table where Eric Trump was beginning to understand that his father's money and influence couldn't protect him from what was written on those pages. The folder contained more than just financial records and bank transfers. It contained the kind of evidence that destroys political careers, ends family legacies, and sends people to federal prison. But what exactly was written on those pages that could make a billionaire's son start sweating under television lights? And why was Jasmine treating each document like a loaded gun aimed directly at the heart of the Trump empire? Jasmine didn't open the yellow folder immediately. She let it sit there like a live grenade, humming with tension and possibility, while Eric Trump's fingers started their nervous tapping on the mahogany table. Not loud, but steady, like the ticking of a man who had heard thunder in the distance and was praying the storm wasn't headed directly for him. She finally reached for the remote control that would transform the massive screen behind the committee into a weapon of mass political destruction. "No more theories," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had spent months building an airtight case. "Let's meet the destination." The screen exploded to life with cold, hard numbers that hit the room like a slap across the face. Red Liberty LLC Wire History 2022 to 2023 appeared in bold letters at the top, followed by 5 wire transfers scrolling downward like a digital waterfall of corruption. Each transaction showed the same origin, Eric Trump Foundation. Each one revealed the same destination, Red Liberty LLC. The dollar amounts climbed past $2 million with the mechanical precision of a cash register counting stolen dreams. $2.1 million, Jasmine said flatly, letting each syllable drop like a judge's gavel, was sent from a foundation bearing your name, Mr. Trump, to an entity with no website, no physical building, no staff, and absolutely no public record of charitable work. Not once, not ever. Eric Trump looked down at his hands for the first time since the hearing began, his confident posture crumbling like a sandcastle hit by an unexpected wave. Jasmine clicked the remote again, and the screen shifted to something that made the financial records look like love letters. Footage began rolling of a lavish ballroom flooded with golden light and buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes from wealthy people feeling good about themselves. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light as they moved through manicured hands, and a stage draped in red and silver dominated one end of the room like an altar to excess. "This," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the elegant chaos on screen, was the 2022 gala in Palm Beach. The event that was supposed to save children's lives. The footage continued rolling, showing Eric Trump taking the stage with his arms spread wide, his smile beaming as he made promises that would later be revealed as lies. His voice echoed through the speakers as he told the crowd that every single dollar raised tonight goes directly to children fighting cancer. The applause was thunderous. Balloons dropped from the ceiling like confetti celebrating a victory that would never come, and champagne flowed like water at a celebration of hope that was actually a funeral for trust. But then Jasmine froze the frame with surgical precision, stopping the footage at the exact moment Eric held up an oversized check for dramatic effect. The number on the check read $1 million, and the words St. Jude Children's Hospital were written in flowing script that looked official and legitimate, and completely false. "This moment," Jasmine said, her voice now carrying the weight of revelation, was captured 3 days before the largest single transfer to Red Liberty LLC. 3 days before $1 million disappeared into a corporate black hole that exists only on paper. She pressed play again, and new footage appeared showing Eric presenting that oversized check to a representative from St. Jude, both men smiling for cameras as hundreds of donors applauded what they believed was genuine charity in action. But Jasmine's voice cut through the celebration like a scalpel through flesh. No record of that donation was ever processed. No record of that money ever reaching St. Jude Children's Hospital. "What we do have," she said, holding up another document from her seemingly endless supply of evidence, is a $480,000 payment to Red Liberty LLC dated the exact same day, labeled as event logistics for services that were never performed. The room gasped collectively, a sound that started as individual sharp intakes of breath and merged into something that sounded like the air being sucked out of the chamber itself. Staffers leaned forward in their chairs, viewers at home moved closer to their television screens, and even the most hardened political reporters felt their cynicism crack slightly in the face of such brazen theft. This wasn't speculation anymore, wasn't political theater or partisan accusations. This was footage, handwriting, and receipts that told a story of calculated betrayal that was impossible to deny or explain away. Eric Trump tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water, but Jasmine didn't give him the oxygen he needed to construct another lie. "You made a promise in front of hundreds of donors and thousands of television viewers," she continued, her voice now carrying the righteous anger of everyone who had ever trusted someone in power and been betrayed. $1 million to children with cancer. And then that money vanished into a company that doesn't exist, for services that were never provided, leaving those children to wait for help that would never come. Even some Republican congressmen shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly finding the wood grain of their desks fascinating rather than meeting the eyes of their colleagues or the cameras. Donald Trump, who had been sitting motionless as a statue for the entire hearing, finally looked away from the screen for the first time, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like steel cables under tension. But Jasmine wasn't finished with her technological assault on their carefully constructed lies. She clicked the remote one more time, and a map of Nevada appeared on the screen, marked with a single red that pulsed like a digital heartbeat. "This," she said, her voice now carrying the quiet satisfaction of a detective who had finally tracked down a fugitive, "is the business address for Red Liberty LLC. Suite 206 in a shopping plaza in Henderson, wedged between a vape store and a closed tanning salon that went out of business before Eric Trump ever heard of charity." The camera zoomed in on the red, revealing a photograph of the most mundane strip mall imaginable, the kind of place where dreams go to die and legitimate businesses never bother to rent space. "The listed suite is empty," Jasmine continued, each word landing like a nail in a coffin. "The phone number leads to a disconnected line that plays a recording saying the number is no longer in service. The mail gets returned to sender marked, recipient unknown. Yet this ghost company, this phantom entity that exists only in bank records and wire transfers, has received more money from the Eric Trump Foundation than all 5 major pediatric hospitals combined." She turned to look directly at Eric Trump, not with fury or hatred, but with the kind of cold precision that cuts deeper than any emotional outburst ever could. "Now, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice like ice scraping against glass, "where exactly did the money go? Where are the children who are supposed to benefit from your father's name and your foundation's promises? And why does $1 million charity check exist only in photographs while the real money disappeared into a Nevada strip mall that doesn't even know your company exists?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn, and everyone in that room knew they were about to witness something that would be talked about for decades. The moment a billion-dollar political dynasty started crumbling under the weight of its own greed, one wire transfer at a time. The screen faded to black, but the silence it left behind wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of heavy quiet that sits in your chest like a stone, the kind that tastes metallic like the moment just before something irreplaceable breaks forever. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the C-SPAN cameraman held his breath instinctively as he zoomed in on what was happening in the space between heartbeats. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink or smile or pause for dramatic effect. She reached down and slid a smaller folder across the table, not yellow like the first one, not manila like official documents. This one was soft blue with edges frayed like torn breath, the cover trembling faintly as if it remembered the hands that had once clutched it in desperation. She placed the blue folder flat on the table and lowered her palms around it, not to steady paper, but to hold still the voices that had been folded inside like pressed flowers from a funeral. "These," she said softly, her voice carrying a different weight now, heavier than numbers, more damning than wire transfers, "are not financial records. They're not contracts or shell corporations or business entities that exist only on paper. These are letters." The words felt quieter than everything that had come before, but they hit harder than any spreadsheet or bank statement ever could. This wasn't about Red Liberty LLC anymore. This was about real people, real families, real children who had believed that powerful people might actually care about whether they lived or died. "They came from families," Jasmine continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper as if she were reading names carved into a memorial wall. "Parents, grandparents, nurses, social workers, all reaching out in the weeks and months after that gala we just watched, asking where the help was, wondering why their applications were being denied, begging for someone to explain why they saw Eric Trump promise $1 million to sick children but couldn't get a single penny for their own dying child." She flipped open the blue folder with the careful reverence of someone handling sacred relics, revealing a single sheet of paper with a child's drawing clipped to the corner. Stick figures drawn in crayon showed one person in a hospital bed, another standing beside them holding their hand, and a son in the corner that somehow looked both hopeful and heartbreaking at the same time. Jasmine raised the letter slowly, like it might disintegrate if she breathed wrong, and began to read in a voice that carried the weight of every parent who had ever sat in a hospital waiting room praying for a miracle. "Dear Eric Trump Foundation," she read, pausing after each word to let them sink in. "We were so grateful to hear that your gala raised money for children with stage 4 cancer. My daughter Ellie was diagnosed 3 months ago with leukemia, and our insurance company won't cover the experimental treatment that might save her life. When we called your office last week, we were told that the emergency fund had run out and there was nothing available. But we just watched the footage of your gala on the news. We saw the $1 million check. We heard your speech about helping kids like Ellie. Please, is there any way you can help her before it's too late?" Jasmine stopped reading. Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers curled slightly under the edge of the page, as if she were trying to hold onto something that was already gone. The silence in the room was absolute, not frozen but dead, like the moment after a car accident when everyone is still processing what just happened. She looked up from the letter, not at Eric Trump, not at the committee, but at the cameras that were broadcasting this moment into living rooms and hospital waiting areas across the country. "She was 7 years old," Jasmine said after a moment that felt like an eternity. "Her name was Ellie Reynolds. She died 2 weeks after this letter was written." Eric Trump's eyes dropped to the table like stones falling into deep water. His jaw twitched, and for the first time since the hearing began, his trademark smirk was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost human. Almost. Jasmine paused longer than she had for any document or wire transfer, her eyes never leaving the letter that represented so much more than words on paper. While this mother was whispering goodbye to her daughter in a pediatric intensive care unit, she said, her voice low and haunting like a prayer spoken in an empty church, a $480,000 invoice was being quietly processed and signed by Eric Trump himself. She reached into the blue folder again, this time pulling out a receipt with a timestamp that would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Black ink on white paper, dated 2 days before the denial letter was sent to Ellie's family. $480,000, Jasmine said, holding the receipt up like evidence in a murder trial. Transferred to Red Liberty LLC, labeled as Event Logistics with no medical partners listed, no hospital invoices attached, no children's names mentioned anywhere in the documentation. Just gone. The gasps that rippled through the room weren't loud or performative. They were real, the kind of involuntary sounds people make when they witness something so fundamentally wrong that their bodies react before their minds can process it. A staffer at the far end of the room visibly swallowed hard, and one Republican congressman turned away from the table entirely, staring into the wood grain of his desk like it might offer some escape from what he was hearing. Even the most cynical political reporters in the back of the room found themselves leaning forward, not for a better shot or a quotable moment, but because they were witnessing something that transcended politics and entered the realm of basic human decency. Jasmine turned the page in the blue folder, revealing another letter, this one written in the shaky handwriting of someone who was running out of hope and time. "Another family," she said, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of barely controlled rage. This one from a father in Ohio whose son was denied a treatment grant from the Eric Trump Foundation. She began to read again, and every word landed like a physical blow. "My son Jacob was denied emergency funding for his chemotherapy treatments. When I called to ask why, they told me the foundation was under federal audit and couldn't release any funds until the investigation was complete. But I saw the photos from your gala. I watched Eric Trump stand there with his hand on his heart, promising to help kids exactly like my son. I believed him. I just didn't know he was selling hope and keeping the receipts." The room didn't gasp this time. The shock had moved beyond sound into something deeper, a collective realization that they were witnessing the systematic theft of the most precious thing imaginable, a parent's hope for their child's survival. Jasmine unfolded another document from her seemingly endless supply of evidence, laying it beside the father's letter like an autopsy report next to a death certificate. "A $72,000 wire transfer," she said, her voice carrying the cold precision of a coroner reading cause of death. "Same week as this denial letter, same destination company, same complete absence of any medical purpose or charitable oversight." She stood up now, her presence filling the space like rising floodwater, and when she spoke next, her voice carried the accumulated weight of every betrayed family, every broken promise, every child who died waiting for help that never came. Parents didn't just donate money to this foundation, she said, her voice rising just slightly but carrying enough force to shatter glass. They trusted it with something infinitely more valuable. They clung to it because when you're told your child has cancer, there are no guarantees left in the world. There are only hopes, desperate and fragile and irreplaceable. And when you stole from that hope, Mr. Trump, when you turned their trust into marble countertops and political advertisements, you didn't just steal money. You stole time. Eric Trump couldn't look at her anymore. His hands tightened on the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white, and even Donald Trump, who had maintained his stone-faced facade throughout the entire hearing, leaned back in his chair with his eyes narrowed like a man watching a building he once owned begin to crack down the middle. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She pulled out one final piece of evidence, not a document this time, but a photograph that would destroy whatever was left of their credibility. It was a private photo, obtained from a former staffer's social media account, taken just days after the Palm Beach Gala. Eric Trump stood in what appeared to be a newly renovated wine-tasting room, crystal glass in hand, surrounded by gold fixtures and imported marble that gleamed under custom lighting. He was smiling the same smile he'd worn on stage while promising to help dying children, but now he was celebrating something very different. The caption on the original post read, "Another perfect upgrade completed. Worth every penny." Jasmine held the photograph up beside Ellie's letter, the contrast so stark and obscene that it felt like a physical assault on human decency. "You toasted renovations," she said, her voice carrying the accumulated fury of every parent who had ever held a child's hand through chemotherapy, while a 7-year-old girl fought for every breath. "You ordered custom Italian marble while a father in Ohio asked your office if his son's name was still on the waiting list for treatment funding. You celebrated upgrades to your wine collection while families sold everything they owned to pay for medications that your foundation was supposed to provide." The photograph and the letter sat side by side on the committee table like evidence from two different worlds, one of obscene luxury built on stolen hope, the other of desperate love that had been betrayed by people who treated charity like a tax write-off. Jasmine set both items down carefully, like flags being folded at a military funeral, then leaned forward one final time with her eyes locked on Eric Trump. "You said the fund ran out," she said, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of a judge reading a death sentence. "But the fund didn't run out, Mr. Trump. The truth did. And now we know exactly where every stolen dollar went. Into wine rooms and political campaigns while children like Ellie Reynolds died waiting for help that was never coming." The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable. It was personal, penetrating, the kind that makes you realize you're not just watching a political hearing, but witnessing the moment when a nation's conscience finally wakes up and asks itself what kind of people it's been willing to tolerate in positions of power, and whether some betrayals are too monstrous to forgive. The name hit harder than a subpoena served at midnight. "Caleb Monroe," Jasmine said clearly, her voice cutting through the lingering emotion from Ellie's story, former accounting manager at the Eric Trump Foundation. Every head in the room turned like synchronized clockwork. Eric Trump froze mid-breath. Donald Trump's eyes narrowed to slits. This wasn't just another witness pulled from the donor rolls or victim testimonies. This was a rupture in the wall they'd built around their secrets, an insider who had seen the machine operate from the inside and lived to tell about it. Caleb walked into the chamber, without looking left or right, carrying himself with the hollow-eyed purpose of someone who had spent months deciding whether to destroy his own career to save his conscience. She wore a simple navy blazer and white blouse, but her most striking feature was the steel calm that didn't match the storm brewing behind her eyes. In her arms, she carried a thin brown folder clenched like it contained something radioactive enough to level city blocks. After taking the oath with steady hands and a voice that never wavered, Caleb sat down across from Jasmine and folded her hands with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in sleepless nights and anxiety-driven nightmares. "For years," she said when asked about her tenure, staring straight ahead like a soldier reporting casualties. Every dollar that went in or out was supposed to cross my desk. Supposed to being the operative phrase, because some expenses never saw official channels. They were handed to me directly by Eric, rewritten, relabeled, or worse, completely reclassified to hide their real purpose. Jasmine lifted a document that made Eric's lawyer start scribbling frantically. The screen behind them displayed a scanned expense form with handwritten notes in red ink that looked like dried blood under the committee room lights. $200,000 to Victory Media, Caleb read from her own copy, originally labeled as campaign advertising, then crossed out and rewritten as Pediatric Cancer Education Initiative. That's Eric's handwriting. I was told to log it as legitimate charity work. There was no such program. The money went directly to a political advertising firm that specialized in attack ads. The tapping of Eric's fingers against the table started again, barely audible but steady like a funeral drum. Jasmine leaned forward with the patience of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. "How often did this happen?" she asked, though everyone in the room already knew the answer would be devastating. "Weekly," Caleb replied without hesitation. Every Monday staff meeting, Eric would review expense summaries and cross out anything that looked too obviously political, then rewrite it as outreach, awareness, or community education. He'd say the same thing every time. The question hung in the air like a noose waiting for someone to stick their neck through it. "What did he say?" Jasmine asked, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone who already knew the answer but needed it spoken aloud for the record. Caleb took a breath that seemed to carry the weight of 4 years of watching her boss treat charity like a personal slush fund. "We're saving America and saving on taxes. Don't worry about the optics, no one audits charity work." Even the Republican committee members weren't defending Eric anymore. One stared at his hands like they might offer an escape route. Another tapped his pen without rhythm or purpose, the nervous energy of someone watching their party implode in real time. The words hung in the air with the arrogance of someone who had never imagined facing consequences for treating children's cancer funds like campaign contributions. But Caleb's testimony was just the appetizer. Jasmine reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small black device that looked innocent enough until you realized what it represented: the smoking gun that would end political careers and destroy family legacies. "I have one final piece of evidence," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried more force than shouting. Audio recorded during a closed-door strategy meeting 6 days after the Palm Beach Gala. It was recorded without consent by a whistleblower, but it's been verified and authenticated by legal counsel. Eric's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, but Eric couldn't hear anything over the sound of his own political death approaching. Donald Trump sat forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the recording device like it was a loaded gun pointed at his empire. Jasmine pressed play, and after a moment of static, Eric Trump's voice filled the chamber with crystal clarity and devastating arrogance. "Look, the donors are idiots. They just want a handshake and a story they can tell their friends. You show them a sick kid, slap our logo on an oversized check, and they'll cry into their cocktails while writing bigger donations. Then we move the real money where it's actually needed for the campaign. It's simple money laundering, but legal because it's charity." The room erupted like a dam bursting. Someone cursed under their breath. A Democratic representative pushed back from the table in pure disbelief. The words weren't just politically damaging, they were sociopathic, the kind of casual cruelty that revealed someone who saw human suffering as nothing more than a marketing opportunity. Eric's entire posture collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. His shoulders sank, his hands gripped the chair arms until his knuckles went white, and for the first time in his privileged life, he looked exactly like what he was: cornered, exposed, and completely out of lies. The audio continued with Eric's voice laughing as he added, "They'll never trace the money trail. People don't question charity work, they question headlines." Jasmine let the recording play until the laughter died, then pressed stop with the finality of a judge's gavel. The silence was absolute, not frozen but dead, like the moment after a car crash when everyone is still processing whether they survived. She looked directly at Caleb, who was covering her mouth with one trembling hand, a single tear rolling down her cheek as she watched the words she'd overheard in countless Monday meetings become evidence in what would certainly be a criminal investigation. "When children become props and donors become marks," Jasmine said, her voice carrying the accumulated weight of every betrayed family and stolen hope. "We stop calling it charity and start calling it what it really is: organized theft with a tax exemption." But what came next would make Eric's recorded confession sound like a gentle admission compared to the 7 words that would finally destroy whatever was left of his credibility and send shockwaves through the Trump empire that would be felt for generations. The silence had teeth, sharp and cutting, ready to draw blood from anyone who dared to break it. Eric's recorded voice still echoed in everyone's memory: "Donors are idiots," while his physical form sat crumpled in the witness chair like a marionette with severed strings. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the mechanical whir of cooling fans behind the committee lights, and then the dam burst with the force of a Category 5 hurricane making landfall. Donald Trump erupted from his seat like a volcano that had been building pressure for decades. He didn't ask permission, didn't wait for recognition, didn't follow any of the parliamentary procedures that govern civilized discourse. "This is a disgrace," he bellowed, his voice thick with the kind of rage that comes from watching your carefully constructed empire begin to crumble in real time. "This woman is slandering my son, my family, everything we've built." His face turned from pink to red to purple as the words poured out like molten lava. "We've given more to this country than she ever will. And now this attack on national television." The room exploded into chaos. Committee members shouted over each other like traders on a stock exchange floor during a market crash. A Republican representative slammed his notebook shut with the force of a gunshot. A Democrat pounded the table demanding order. The chairman's gavel struck repeatedly, creating a percussion section for the political symphony of destruction playing out in real time. Reporters in the back leaped to their feet with phones recording every second of the meltdown that would dominate news cycles for months. Through it all, Jasmine remained seated with the calm of a lighthouse keeper watching storms crash against rocks that had weathered worse. She watched Donald Trump rant about conspiracies and deep state document manipulation, his voice becoming more strained and desperate with each accusation. But his performance was too loud, too fast, too obviously the sound of a man trying to shout down an avalanche with nothing but hot air and wounded pride. The chairman finally snapped. "Mr. Trump, you are not recognized to speak. Please sit down or you will be escorted from this chamber." Trump sat, but not before pointing a trembling finger directly at Jasmine like a weapon that had run out of ammunition. "You'll regret this," he hissed, the threat hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that was already burning out of control. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she turned back to her microphone with the fluid grace of someone who had been waiting her entire career for this exact moment. She smoothed a single page from her folder and tapped it twice against the table, the sound somehow audible even over the lingering chaos. "With the committee's permission," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk, "I have one final question for the witness." The room fell silent again, but this wasn't the same silence as before. This one came loaded with anticipation, with the electric tension that fills the air just before lightning strikes. Everyone knew they were about to witness something that would be replayed on news broadcasts and social media for years to come. The moment when political theater became personal reckoning. Jasmine stood slowly, deliberately, her movement commanding attention without demanding it. She walked around the committee table until she was standing directly in front of Eric Trump, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of every broken promise, every stolen dollar, every child who had died waiting for help that never came. "Mr. Trump," she said, each word precisely measured and delivered with surgical precision, "look me in the eye." Eric's head lifted reluctantly, like a condemned man being forced to face his executioner. His eyes met hers for the first time during the entire hearing, and in that moment, everyone watching could see the exact instant when his last shred of arrogance finally died. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, Close enough that only Eric could hear the full weight of what she was about to say, but loud enough that every microphone in the chamber would pick up the words that would end his political life forever. Where are the children, Eric? 7 words. Simple, direct, impossible to deflect or spin or explain away. Not an accusation, not a speech, not a political grandstand, just a question that cut through every lie, every excuse, every carefully constructed defense, and went straight to the heart of what mattered most. Where were the children who were supposed to benefit from the millions of dollars that had disappeared into political campaigns and luxury renovations? Eric Trump's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lips moved like he was trying to form words, but his brain couldn't construct a single coherent response that wouldn't make him look even worse than he already did. His eyes darted toward his attorney, toward his father, toward the exit, searching desperately for some escape route that didn't exist. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 seconds. 15 seconds that felt like watching someone's soul leave their body in real time. When Eric finally managed to speak, his voice was barely a whisper, cracked and broken like something that had been shattered beyond repair. The foundation, always operated within legal guidelines. But even he seemed to realize how pathetic the words sounded, how completely inadequate they were as a response to the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jasmine didn't move, didn't smile, didn't show any sign of satisfaction or victory. She just stood there, letting the weight of those 7 words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. Everyone present understood they had just witnessed something unprecedented, the moment when unlimited wealth and political power ran headfirst into simple human decency and lost completely. Where are the children, Eric? The question echoed in the minds of everyone watching, not as a political soundbite, but as a moral reckoning that would follow the Trump family long after the cameras stopped rolling and the hearing room lights went dark. Because some questions, once asked with the right combination of evidence and moral authority, can never be unanswered, no matter how much money you have or how loud you scream about conspiracies and fake news. The 7 words that shattered a billionaire's son weren't complicated or clever. They were just true, and sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. After destroying Eric with 7 words, Jasmine softened her voice, not with weakness, but with the strength of someone who knew what real charity looked like. I want to tell you about a place where charity came with coffee cans and paper plates, not marble floors and tax write-offs. She spoke to the cameras, to families in hospital waiting rooms. Growing up in East Texas, we didn't have foundations. We had church basements. When kids got cancer, we held fish fries, not galas. Women who cleaned offices all week dropped $20 into mason jars like they were tithing to God. The contrast was brutal. We scraped quarters from couch cushions. Eric stole millions from dying children. My cousin Maya had leukemia at 8. She survived because people with nothing gave everything. She held up a faded photo. Church parking lot, handwritten sign for Maya's treatment, $3 plates. The math was devastating. $2.1 million could have saved 210 children. Instead, it bought wine rooms while kids died waiting. The screen showed Eric's marble renovation next to a list of children who never got treatment. Jasmine delivered the final verdict. "I didn't steal money, Eric. You stole belief." Every luxury upgrade was a choice. Wine over children, marble over medicine. This wasn't business. This was blasphemy. That moral judgment would haunt him longer than any prison sentence, because it revealed a character that no amount of money could ever repair. Jasmine reached into her briefcase one final time and pulled out a plain envelope sealed with red wax, stamped with the official seal of the Department of Justice. The weight of it seemed to bend reality around the committee table as she placed it down with the finality of a death certificate. This is an official criminal referral to the Department of Justice for investigation into the Eric Trump Foundation and all associated entities, including Red Liberty LLC, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just signed a political death warrant. The committee vote was swift and brutal. Yes. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. The electronic board tallied each decision in real time, like a digital execution. Final result: criminal referral approved, 12-8. Eric Trump's face went ash gray as he realized that congressional theater had just become federal criminal investigation. Donald Trump stood up slowly, no longer the raging bull from earlier, but a broken king watching his empire crumble. Without a word, he walked out of the chamber, his footsteps echoing like a funeral march. Eric followed moments later, shoulders hunched like a man carrying invisible chains, already looking like someone preparing for a perp walk. Within hours, America exploded. Every major network interrupted regular programming with breaking news banners. Trump Foundation referred for criminal investigation. Social media became a wildfire of rage and revelation. Hashtag Where Are the Children trended #1 globally. Former donors shared their betrayal stories. Families posted photos of children who had died waiting for help that never came. Protesters surrounded Trump Tower by sunset, holding candles and photos of sick children. Signs read, "Charity is not a crime family business," and "Marble floors, buried dreams." The crowd was silent, which somehow made it more terrifying than if they had been screaming. Congressional Republicans began distancing themselves faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship. Even Fox News struggled to defend the audio recordings of Eric calling donors idiots. By midnight, 3 state attorneys general announced their own investigations. The IRS opened an emergency audit. The Trump Organization's stock price crashed. And somewhere in a congressional office, Jasmine Crockett sat alone reading letters from families thanking her for giving their dead children a voice. But the most devastating consequence wasn't legal or financial. It was that 7 words, "Where are the children, Eric?" had become the question that an entire nation was asking about every politician, every charity, every person in power who claimed to care about other people's suffering while profiting from it. Jasmine sat alone in her office hours after the hearing ended, surrounded by thousands of letters that had arrived within hours. Thank you notes from families, drawings from children, death threats from Trump supporters. One envelope contained just 7 words written in a child's handwriting. "You reminded me what courage looks like." She filed it next to her DOJ referral letter, 2 pieces of paper that represented the best and worst of America. Within days, the ripple became a tsunami. Congress passed emergency legislation banning all 501c3 organizations from political contributions, the fastest bipartisan action in decades. State prosecutors launched investigations into charity fraud nationwide. The Crockett Amendment became law, requiring real-time transparency for all charitable donations over $10,000. For the first time in years, systemic change happened not despite Washington, but because someone in Washington refused to stay silent. But Jasmine didn't attend the bill signing ceremony. She stood outside a children's hospital in Houston, watching a father walk his daughter to chemotherapy, funded by a legitimate charity that actually sent money where they promised. Real change didn't happen in marble halls with photo opportunities. It happened in hospital rooms where children got medicine instead of dying while billionaires bought wine. 6 months later, Eric Trump was indicted on 23 federal charges. Red Liberty LLC was dissolved. The Trump Foundation paid $47 million in restitution to actual children's hospitals. Donald Trump's political career effectively ended the moment his son couldn't answer 7 simple words. But none of that mattered as much as the letter Jasmine received from a mother in Ohio. "My son Jacob got his treatment funding. He's in remission." Those 7 words saved his life. The screen fades to images of America slowly healing, new legislation being signed, legitimate charities receiving unprecedented donations, families getting help that actually reaches them. Jasmine's voice returns one final time, not triumphant but quietly determined. Justice isn't always a lightning strike that changes everything instantly. Sometimes it's a slow flame that burns away lies until only truth remains. The question isn't whether powerful people will always try to exploit our trust. The question is whether we'll always have people brave enough to ask, "Where are the children?" Change doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives like morning light, steady and inevitable, revealing what was always there but hidden in darkness. 7 words became a movement. A movement became law. Law became protection for the powerless. And sometimes, when the right person asks the right question at exactly the right moment, even billionaires have to answer to the children they forgot existed. If this story made you believe that one voice can still matter, that truth can still win against unlimited money and power, then don't just watch, act. Subscribe to see more stories about people who refuse to stay silent when silence becomes complicity. The next story might be about someone you know, someone who chose courage over comfort when it mattered most. Because the most dangerous lie isn't the one they tell us, it's the one we tell ourselves, that someone else will always speak up when we won't.